please. We're going to have lots of fun tonight, but I want to start by talking about sort of how the book got started in my life and the story of its creation, since it's just come out in here in Ireland. And I also want to say how happy we are to be here. I've always wanted to visit Ireland, and it's been really fun the last few days to be here, but this is certainly the coolest moment. I know some people have an obstructed view, so for those people I'm going to move very slowly to the left and right, just for the the columns people. Hi, columns people. So about 13 years ago, I worked as a student chaplain at a children's hospital in Ohio, in the middle of the United States. And I was basically like a student chaplain is like a minister in training, sort of. But I was a very bad minister in training. The main reason that I was so bad is that when faced with the reality of what I saw there, my response to it was like basically hopelessness and despair instead of, being able to be with people on the worst days of their lives. Because I saw a lot of kids who were sick there, I saw a lot of kids who died while I was there as well, and I wasn't able to respond to that thoughtfully or hopefully or in a way that brought any comfort. My only response to it was to feel angry and hopeless and nihilistic. And as soon as I finished my time as a chaplain, I worked there for about 5 months, I immediately started to write about a children's hospital, except that I wasn't writing about children or a hospital, I was writing about myself. I was writing about this 22-year-old who was exactly like me, only better looking, and way wittier, and he would, it was like basically the plot of all these stories I was writing is that there would be these female doctors who were inexplicably attracted to this chaplain. And it would be like, which hot doctor will he choose? And I was writing those stories for myself. I was trying to process my own grief, my own anger, my own frustration at what I'd seen while I was working as a chaplain. And it wasn't about anyone other than me. I wasn't trying to make you something. I wasn't trying to make a gift for you. I was trying to do myself a favor by, hopefully becoming less crazy through the writing of these stories. And maybe that works, but it didn't work for me. So I eventually put those stories aside because they sucked. When the only response to something that you have is nihilism or hopelessness or despair, it just doesn't make for particularly interesting fiction. I also don't think ultimately it's true. So I put those stories aside, I wrote other books, and after each of those books I would say, okay, now is the time I'm going to write the children's hospital book, and then it was never the time. But then finally, after, I guess in about 2009, I wrote something I liked. That was almost the children's hospital book. That's what I still call it, even though it no longer takes place in a children's hospital. And then right after I started to write things that I kind of liked, I became friends with a young woman, a nerd fighter. For those of you who don't know what nerd fighters are, by the way, there's a lot of people. I know that it seems like, everyone knows. But in fact, lots of people don't know, and that's okay. Some people thought they were coming to a book reading. So I hope they have fun. A nerd fighter is a person who fights for nerd culture and for intellectualism, and the nerd fighter community built up around the video blogs that I make with my brother, and nerd fighters basically try to make the world a more awesome place, and they try to build spaces on the internet that are more about engagement instead of mere distraction. So how do you take something that's used primarily for distraction, like say Tumblr, and also make it a place where you can have engaged conversations, which I would argue Tumblr is actually pretty good at. So I became friends with a young nerd fighter named Esther, who was 14 when I met her, who was very sick with cancer and who died in August of 2010 when she was 16. And during our friendship, I got to know her family and her friends as well. Esther really gave me the gift that I needed to write the book, which is that she taught me that a short life can also be a good life and a rich life. The reason that I responded with such anger and hopelessness to what I saw in the hospital, to the death of children, to the suffering of children, is that it was unfair. But I could handle unfair. What I couldn't handle was like utterly hopeless, utterly devoid of meaning. And what Esther taught me, Esther came into my life and said, I'm not too psyched about having cancer. This sucks. I'm pissed off about it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I am grateful to be alive. I feel lucky to be alive. And that a short life can also be a rich life. And we live in this culture that's so obsessed with longevity and with the expectation of longevity, which fortunately, a lot of people will enjoy, that it's very, very difficult for us to acknowledge that reality, that a short life can also be a good and rich and full life. And until we accept that, we're going to marginalize people whose lives may be shortened by illness or injury or whatever it is. And I really wanted to take what Esther had taught me. Hazel, the girl in The Fault in Our Stars, is very different from Esther, and I particularly want to say that because Esther's not here to defend herself. She hated America's Next Top Model. There's lots of things in the book that are vastly different that Esther never would have believed. But I wanted to take what she had taught me and try to bring that to the story, to argue that it's not only long lives that are good, or that are fulfilling, or even that are heroic. And so that is when the book finally became possible. In the end, it only became possible because of a collaboration. It only became possible because I knew and loved Esther, but it also only became possible because of many other collaborations, like all of the thousands of people who have emailed me to ask me what happens after the end of Looking for Alaska, that infuriated me so much that I was inspired to write this very angry character, Peter Van Houten. But it's also nice. It's nice when people want to know what happens at the end of your book because it means they cared about it. I just don't know. So it's like being asked every single day about special relativity. And you're just like, for the millionth time, I still don't know. So I wanted to try to bring as much as I could, conscious of the fact that it's not my story and not trying to take anyone else's story. I wanted to make up a story that tried to give life and attention to those sick characters and making them the center of the story instead of this kind of traditional, for lack of a better word, cancer novel, in which someone suffers terribly and then dies. But a healthy person, usually a boy, who loved the sick person, usually a girl, because this is kind of a symptom of patriarchy, the healthy person who survives has learned important lessons, and the reason that the person who has died is so that the healthy person could learn lessons. Well, that's ridiculous. That says that the reason that sick people exist is so that healthy people can learn to be grateful. There's no other way for healthy people to become grateful. And I wanted to make the argument that that the lives of sick and disabled and marginalized people are of inherent value in precisely the same way that any other life is. And I also wanted to argue that they're just as that sick people are just as funny and angry and sarcastic and interesting and joyful and sad as anyone else. So I'm going to read a little bit from the very beginning of the book, but unfortunately I don't have a copy, so I'm going to ask you for your copy.
Aww.
What is your name? Claire? Hi, thanks. I'm just going to read from the beginning of the book. You have to pretend that I'm a 16-year-old girl.